There is one prayer which St. Ignatius of Loyola said to his followers was so important that if, he said, you don't pray any other prayer in the course of a day, never let your head hit the pillow at night before doing this. It's the Consciousness Examen, which sounds a lot like examination of conscience, doesn't it? But whereas an examination of conscience focuses on my sins and where I have failed in serving God, a Consciousness Examen traces the patterns of thoughts, feelings, and desires in the course of a day. And by doing it every day, which is why Ignatius said it was so important, we can trace the pattern of thoughts, feelings, and desires over the course of many days, many weeks, many months, even many years. It's only that way, by making the Consciousness Examen a part of our lives, a regular part of our routine, that we can pay attention to the voices of God and the enemy of our human nature as they make themselves known to us in our thoughts, feelings, and desires. Remember, there is an incredible difference between how God and how Satan present themselves in our thoughts, feelings, and desires. It's not always obvious. It can be subtle, but the difference is remarkable. The thoughts, feelings, and desires that come from God are all meant to draw us toward Himself, which, since He is our author, our maker, our creator, our divine lover, our redeemer, our sanctifier, all of that, all of those thoughts, feelings, and desires are intended to draw us toward our most perfect self, to be the persons we were created to be when, as Psalm 139 puts it, God knit us in our mother's womb. The enemy of our human nature wants to do the opposite. He wants to lead us to shipwreck. He wants us to be anything other than the persons we were created to be by God. He wants to tear us down and pull us away from the things of God. This is why Ignatius thought it was incredibly important to pay attention to the thoughts, feelings, and desires that arise within us, the movements of our souls that often come from the work of the Spirit of God or the work of the fallen angels led by Satan. Oh, to be sure, some thoughts, feelings, and desires come purely from us. If I am thirsty and I say I want a glass of water, that's not necessarily a movement of the Holy Spirit or of the fallen angels. It's just from me. But most thoughts, feelings, and desires of a more significant nature are either prompted by God or prompted by the enemy. There are two sets of rules or tools for the discernment of spirits that Ignatius provides in his spiritual exercises. He says they exist, or he presents them to us so that we might recognize the movement within us, and then recognizing it, admit who it comes from, affirm who it comes from, and then respond appropriately, to follow the good and to reject the bad. We can do that on a day-to-day basis as these things arise, but how much more effective is it if we pay attention to the pattern of those thoughts, feelings, and desires? And that is done through the Consciousness Examen. Now, if you do a search on the internet for St. Ignatius of Loyola Examen, you'll get lots of responses. There are many ways and many approaches to this Consciousness Examen. I won't belabor you with any detailed way to do it. I'm going to invite you to a very simple approach to the Consciousness Examen. It's so simple that instead of doing it just once a day, you might consider doing it twice or 3 times a day. It's this. Place yourself prayerfully before God. Enter into quiet in your soul Beg for the light of God's grace by which you can see the movements of the Holy Spirit and of the enemy. And then call to mind only two things. What was the most significant movement, that is to say, thought, feeling, or desire, since my last examen? What was the most significant thought, feeling, or desire that led me closer to God, or made me more aware of the presence of God, or more grateful for the things of God? Call that to mind. Let that experience or that thought, feeling, and desire replay itself in your mind, your soul. And then, in the light of God's grace, ask the other question. What is the most significant thought, feeling, or desire since my last examen that led me away from God, that diminished my faith, hope, and charity, that caused me to question God's grace or my relationship with God? Those two questions will help you pay attention to the grace of God and to the movement, the temptations of Satan. The word Satan comes from Hebrew ha-shatan. It means the tempter that is always trying to trip you up and trick you. By paying attention to those movements, those moments of the day, those people, those encounters, those situations in which you were intensely aware of God's presence and God's grace, those things that built you up. And conversely, those situations, those conversations, those people, those events that tore you down. By paying attention to that, you trace the movements, and you can see, every time I do this, I feel uplifted. Or every time I say this, or every time I talk with this person, every time I am in this place, I feel torn down, tempted, smaller because of that. Tracing this through the course of a day is great. Tracing it through the course of a week or a month or a lifetime is a way of growing deeply in the spiritual life. You see, the Consciousness Examen doesn't have to be a detailed, lengthy, intricate process. It can be a very simple prayer. Father in heaven, give me your light, and by that light help me to understand where I saw you in the movements of my thoughts, feelings, and desires today, and where I felt drawn away from you in my thoughts, feelings, and desires. A priest once presented to me in a very simple way how to do a simple examen after every conversation or every meeting or every event. He put it in the sign of the cross. By making the sign of the cross, even virtually, but I find it helpful to do it physically, after a significant meeting or conversation or event in your life, you can do a simple examen of consciousness. Where did I see God in this? Where was I drawn away from God, and maybe there was too much of me in this? What did I learn? And how can I apply that the next time this happens? Ultimately, that's the goal of the Consciousness Examen, isn't it? So that I can take the lessons of today or the week or the month and be more aware of things as they happen in the instant. St. Ignatius called the Consciousness Examen a prayer for finding God in all things. And that's what it's meant to be. The more we practice the awareness of the movements of God and of the enemy, the more we are aware of those and the thoughts, feelings, and desires that are prompted by them, the more we carry that with us into everything we do as it happens in real time. And we can accomplish what we thought perhaps once was an unrealized goal an impossible ambition. As St. Paul puts it, to pray always. If prayer means being aware of the presence of God and our relationship with God, then the Consciousness Examen, if practiced every day, can be the royal road to praying always. In real time, we become aware of the movement of God within us. We respond to those thoughts, feelings, and desires that lead us toward God, and we reject and walk away from those thoughts, feelings, and desires that will take us away from God. It's the most important prayer, Ignatius says, that you will ever pray. God bless you.